Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Mary Tech. I'm the Director of Operations for the Guiding Star Project, and I am very excited to be able to introduce our presenter tonight, Leah. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that if during the presentation you have any questions for Leah, feel free to type them into the question box in the sidebar. And we will address those questions later on in the presentation. So now I will introduce Leah. Leah founded the Guiding Star Project in 2011, feeling called to help women and families by providing resources that honor the natural law and promote new feminism. She writes and speaks around the country about the beauty and dignity of women and their natural feminine abilities. Leah lives in Minnesota with her husband and 6 children and works locally as an international board-certified lactation consultant. So with that, Leah, thank you so much for doing this tonight. And go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi there to everybody who's on the call live right now, and hi to anybody who's accessing this through YouTube or a platform at a different time. We hope that this information is helpful for you tonight. I'm going to start out with a bit of a disclaimer. I'm a board-certified lactation consultant. I'm an IBCLC. I do have a master's degree in health and wellness with a specialty on women's health and lactation. I did a specialty track during my master's degree, specifically on women's health and breastfeeding. I'm not a doctor, so nothing in my presentation should be interpreted as medical advice. You might hear me answer a question tonight about mastitis, where I say something about a lump in your breast, and I talk about that as being something that can be normal in lactation. Don't take that to mean that you don't need to have the lump in your breast checked out by your doctor. So if there's something that goes beyond the scope of what we're talking about, I cannot address individual circumstances and potential problems. So please use common sense and speak with your doctor about any concerns that you might have. So I'm going to jump right into this. Like Mary said, I'm a mom to 6 kids. I've learned a lot about breastfeeding in the last 14 years, almost 14 years. My oldest is nearly 14. My youngest is 3. I've breastfed for roughly a decade of my life. And so even though I've done a lot of education, a lot of talking, a lot of reading, a lot of working with moms with breastfeeding, all of that I think is secondary to what I have learned just by sitting and having my own babies at my breast. I think my own experiences of breastfeeding have probably been the most informative and the most helpful as a lactation specialist. So I ironically have a lactation practice called Naturally Nourished Baby. And because of that Naturally Nourished Baby name that I chose for my private practice, I wanted to start out tonight and call this talk, it's totally natural. Breastfeeding is totally natural, because you're going to hear that a lot. The reality is that breastfeeding may be natural in that your body is producing this milk naturally, but it is anything but easy. Natural does not mean easy. And so this slide that I wanted to start out with for you, just kind of a humorous, like your expectation of feeding your baby is that it's going to be very easy and it's going to be very beautiful and hearts and everything's wonderful. And the reality is that, you know, a week into this thing, you're exhausted. You still haven't changed your clothes that you came home from the hospital in. You may have cracked and bleeding nipples. You haven't slept in 4 days, and this kid screams unless it's being held. So the reality of breastfeeding and just early parenthood, it may be natural and it may be part of the process, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be a pro at it and that you're going to be able to just do this right off the bat. There's a lot of things that go into successfully breastfeeding a baby, and we're going to talk about them a bit tonight, but just know that if you're struggling right now, if you found this webinar because you're like, what the heck, this is not natural, I hear you. I got it. I understand where you're at. I called my practice Naturally Nourished Baby because I wanted to acknowledge that even for me, right up front, it took a lot of work. I can tell you that it's totally worth it though. What you're doing for your baby is something that you will not regret. By working to get your milk established and working to get a breastfeeding relationship established with your baby, this is something that you're going to be tremendously proud of and that you will feel really good about doing. Just a little bit about my own story that brought me to this place of even becoming a lactation consultant. Way back when I had my first baby, almost 14 years ago, I had taken the classes at the hospital, and I think I even sat through the one. They did like 6 childbirth education sessions and then 1 extra session on breastfeeding, and I sat through it and I listened, and I don't know how I missed it. I totally missed some of the basic principles of how to get breastfeeding off to a great start. And so when my first baby was born over the 4th of July weekend, and there were no lactation specialists at the hospital when I delivered, I didn't see anyone. I just went home pretty confident that I'm going to get this. It'll work out just fine. About 4 days later, I was massively engorged, crying and in pain. I found the lactation consultant. Within about 15 minutes of meeting with her, everything was back on track. Things were starting to look much better. And I just kind of realized that, you know, we really need to listen to other women's experience, and we really need to share our experiences with other women and help them along. And so that was kind of what set me on the course to becoming a lactation consultant. And so I'm happy to share what I know with you. So please feel free to ask questions as we go. It is worth the effort. We live in a time, fortunately, where our government and conventional wisdom in medicine has come to the point where we can definitively say breast is best. We know for many reasons why breast milk is best for our babies. Tonight, I'm only going to focus on 2 of the reasons here. There are documented benefits for babies and moms, which are the 2 that I'm going to talk about tonight. But there's also a lot of scientific evidence out there that talks about how breastfeeding helps everything from family structure to national budgets, family and national budgets. There's actually a lot of research out there that shows breastfeeding, how economical it is, not only just in the family, but also for the country. For employers, there's actually an employer case for breastfeeding that has been released that tries to encourage employers to provide policies, resources, space for their employees to breastfeed, because they've been able to show that it also helps the workplace to be more successful when mothers are supported, and also the environment. We know that breastfeeding is great for the environment because it reduces the need for bottles and formula and packaging and all that, because you just got all the packaging, all the goods right there with you all the time. So those last 3 options that are listed on the slide, if you're following along on your computer, you can see the slides that I'm talking about. If you're on the phone, I apologize, you probably can't see this, but I'm going to try to explain to you what I'm talking about so you know where we're at. So we're going to jump into just some of the benefits. First of all, for babies. The benefits of breastfeeding for babies, there are so many. On my slide, I listed some of the key ones that you're going to hear about most frequently, but really there are too many to name. We don't even understand all the benefits of having that baby at breast, you know, right up tight with mom. There's all these documented benefits about, you know, it's been linked to higher IQ scores, things like that. You know, lower incidence of obesity, diabetes, certain childhood illnesses. Like there have been direct links that breastfeeding can help to make sure that your baby stays as healthy as possible. But really, what I've experienced with my own babies is the closeness of breastfeeding and that bonding experience for your baby to feel safe and secure with you is probably the most priceless of all the benefits for the baby. And so I will always encourage moms to try breastfeeding just to bond with their baby, keep them close. The hormonal flow of oxytocin and prolactin, just the hormonal effects of breastfeeding on you and your baby, it's worth trying. But I do want to show you this next slide, actually. For those of you that can't see this, I have a slide of a magnification of 3 different types of milk. It's, I think it's 200 power magnification, and it's 3 images. And the first image is of infant formula, artificial infant formula. And you can kind of just see a gray mass with some little kind of dots throughout it, you know, some little nutrient dots throughout it. And it's pretty gray though. And then the second image is of cow's milk, which cow's milk has some living components within it. And so there's a lot more, matter. There's a lot more dots in this image of cow's milk. And then the final image is of human breast milk. And human milk, it's really just not even a comparable between infant formula and human milk. The live components of our milk, you really can't even quantify the benefits to the baby of having a food that's perfectly tailored for their digestive system. And the beauty of human milk that can't even be described in what I'm showing here is that it changes. As your baby grows and develops, your body, miraculously, your breasts adjust and provide milk. Sorry, I've got someone calling me right now. Sorry about that. The wonders of technology. I'm on the phone doing a webinar at the same time that somebody starts calling me. So, where was I? Okay, yeah, so human milk, the fact that it can change along with your baby as they're growing, it really is just a miraculous thing that our bodies are capable of doing. So yeah, there's a slide that you see out there as part of some public health campaigns. It compares formula more to like a pill, like a vitamin. And then breast milk would be actually like the real raw source of food, you know, like the healthy fruits and vegetables, the healthy food that comes straight from the source. That's the difference between breast milk and formula for a baby. From the baby's perspective, it's the joy of eating a juicy fresh orange or chewing on a chalky vitamin C tablet. I guess that's probably one of the better ways to describe the difference. So for moms, the benefits to mothers of breastfeeding, though, this is really the kind of stuff that you're going to hear covered in your class when you take a breastfeeding class at the hospital or from your birth provider, your doula, your midwife. The benefits to moms are really unbelievable. Not only the first one you always hear, sometimes it's the most convincing argument for some moms to consider breastfeeding. Breastfeeding burns extra calories, so it can help you lose pregnancy weight after. Well, it does. It does burn extra calories, but don't let that be the reason that you decide to breastfeed. It's a pretty minimal number of calories comparatively. Estimates, I've seen some unsourced estimates say as high as 1,000 calories a day. That's probably a little high. It's probably a little closer to around 300 calories a day, but still, that's like an extra couple lactation cookies. So there is a little something there that you can treat yourself a little special when you are breastfeeding. You can indulge just a little bit more if you're breastfeeding and know that the milk that you're making is burning those calories. But some of the better reasons, though, for you to consider breastfeeding is that the hormonal cocktail that happens with breastfeeding really helps your body to repair itself. Immediately after you deliver a baby, when you put your baby to breast for the first few times, you're going to feel a lot of cramping as the baby first suckles onto the breast, first kind of latches on that birth time. You may feel some intense uterine cramping, and a lot of women don't like that. They really don't like that. But what's happening there is very important for your body. Your uterus has just expanded dramatically to grow this human being, and now it needs to go back down to its healthy pre-pregnancy size. And so the contractions that are happening, it's from that oxytocin release. Now, oxytocin is a natural hormone that you create as a woman. It's a natural hormone. It's the love hormone. They sometimes call it the bonding hormone, the sex hormone. It's involved with orgasm. It's involved with just intense feelings of connectedness and bonding to another human being, the love hormone. Well, there's a synthetic version, a non-real, an artificial version of oxytocin that you're probably familiar with, and that's called Pitocin. So Pitocin is something that many of us receive as a labor augmentation, something to help kick our labor along. And we know what it does in labor. It causes intense uterine contractions, sometimes a little unnaturally intense. But Pitocin, if you were to hemorrhage, if you were to experience a lot of bleeding after the delivery of your baby, you would absolutely need a shot of Pitocin to help bring your uterus back down, to help it clamp down, to stop that bleeding. So Pitocin is necessary at times, but you have a beautiful version, oxytocin, which is naturally created in the breastfeeding process. So there are studies out there that show breastfeeding can lower your risk of breast and ovarian cancer, also can lower your risk of osteoporosis. One of the bigger things, you don't have to buy a measure formula, sterilize nipples and bottles. Breastfeeding, it can save you time and money, which is absolutely true. Breastfeeding, some of the estimates for how much money breastfeeding can save your family, they're very high. And not just in the cost of formula and bottles, but also in the amount of time that you do not have to take off work if you're working, or the amount of time spent not on medical bills for sick babies. And so there's some very compelling arguments that are out there. I invite you to look them up if you're unsure about this, if you're needing a reason to consider breastfeeding. The evidence is there, so don't be afraid to look for it. So deciding to breastfeed provides you with a regular time for relaxing quietly with your newborn. And this one right here is probably my favorite reason. As I started having babies, I hadn't really even thought about, handing my babies off to other people at family gatherings or parties or wherever we were at. It never really concerned me. I hadn't really considered that I might just want to take my baby off to a back room and have some quiet time. And I found that having a breastfed baby is one of the best excuses for you to get away, take a nap, and rest in middle of a hectic family function, in middle of a social setting that you're just not wanting the baby to be handed around to everybody in the room with dirty hands. When you just assert your right to breastfeed your baby as the mother of this baby, it reminds the world that you and your baby belong together, that you provide something for your baby that nobody else can provide. And I think oftentimes it helps people to see you in a new way as a mom and just have a certain level of respect for what you're doing for your baby. So don't ever be afraid to assert that and take that time. And I know I've heard some moms say they didn't want to breastfeed because they didn't want to be locked away in the corner. They didn't want to have to go to the bathroom to breastfeed their baby. They didn't want to have to go to a dressing room to go breastfeed their baby. And they're absolutely true. You should not have to be relegated to an area of the world where nobody can see you. But I do think that for some of us that have introverted tendencies at times, it's a beautiful excuse. It's a beautiful way for you to just go off and be with the one that you really want to be with the most, probably, and that's your beautiful, gorgeous little baby. On that note, there has been a lot of legislation protecting the rights of breastfeeding moms. So I want you to all realize that you have the right to breastfeed your baby in almost every state in public locations. I think 36 states have passed protective measures for breastfeeding mothers. There are national protective laws that say that you are allowed to be in federal or national buildings breastfeeding your baby anywhere where you would normally allowed to be. So if it's a public area of a federal building, you are protected as a breastfeeding mother to feed there. 36 states, like I said, have enacted legislation that protect you beyond that location, just into general public spaces. And there's a lot more breastfeeding legislation being pushed through all the time, which helps to protect us as moms. That, we shouldn't have to sit in the bathrooms or wear covers at all times. At Guiding Star, we really want to normalize breastfeeding anywhere women are, anywhere babies are, anywhere where our breasts are going with us. If our babies are there, we should be able to feed them without apology. And so that's something that if you are having trouble kind of wrapping your mind around that, if it's a question of modesty or fear or judgment, please reach out to us. We'd love to have that conversation with you to help you feel comfortable with your right to breastfeed. as a mother. Now, as a lactation consultant, I spend a lot of time educating women on what their body actually is going to do when it begins to lactate. Amazingly, we often don't know how our body works. Molly Daly addressed that a little bit with the last webinar on fertility and natural fertility, that as women we have a right to know how our fertility works and how our body goes about ovulating and how pregnancy would work. Same thing with breastfeeding. You have a right to know and understand what your body does. Your healthy female body should follow certain hormonal patterns, developmental patterns, and you deserve to know that. So, just a really quick overview of this. Your breasts as a woman are not mature until they have gone through the full process of mature milk coming into your breast. So until you have breastfed a baby, you actually have not had the full maturation of your breast tissue. So I know that may come as a shock to some because we see breasts all over the place in very mature content and in very mature ways. But really, your cells and the biological aspects of your breasts, they mature through a process called lactogenesis. There are 3 phases of lactogenesis. If you see on the slide, you can kind of see what a breast looks like non-pregnant. It has some ductal areas, and then it has, the breast tissue, the ducts, everything's there, but it's kind of small. And then you can see below the hormonal chart. I kind of line these charts up to show what's happening here. So at the point of conception, your breast tissue the first time, it's not mature. Roughly around 16 to 22 weeks, lactogenesis 1 is going to start. So the hormonal control of the breast development happens here. So you have very high levels of progesterone in your pregnancy. That helps to maintain a healthy pregnancy. Your baby needs that. Progesterone acts as an inhibitor to prolactin. So as long as you have high levels of progesterone in your system, you're not going to lactate. Now you can see at birth, where birth happens, progesterone plummets. It goes down. And when that happens, the effects of prolactin are able to happen within your body. You're able to start creating the milk. Your breast will naturally start to fill with milk with that drop in progesterone. Your progesterone drops after the delivery of your placenta. So if you happen to have retained bits of placenta after your delivery, if you don't fully deliver your placenta, you could have a delayed onset of lactation. Your milk may not come in as easily or as we would expect it to, but that normally doesn't happen. What normally happens for most women, they deliver their baby, they deliver their placenta, and then you can see on this chart about 30 to 40 hours after birth, lactogenesis 2 begins. And this is the point where that progesterone has dropped, prolactin levels are high enough there that your milk will come in. So in that first 30 to 40 hours before your milk has really started to produce, you have what's called colostrum. And that colostrum is what we refer to as liquid gold, that very first milk that your baby gets in that first, 2 days roughly. It has, the quantity of it is different than milk that you will ever make again. And it's just really special milk for your baby. High levels of immunity, properties, immunological, everything is really, really awesome with colostrum. It's perfect for your baby. It coats their little tummy lining and helps protect it. So it's worth, even if you can only breastfeed for 3 days, it's worth it. Give it what you've got. Try your hardest. So now this lactogenesis 2 phase into lactogenesis 3. This is a rough go right here. This is the point where I meet most women as a lactation consultant. That point where your breasts are just beginning to make milk. Before your milk is mature and fully established, which happens, mature milk supply starts around day 10. It's not really well established probably for the first 2 to 3 weeks. I always tell moms, give this a solid 3 weeks. Let this happen. Try. Don't count this out. If it's not working well at a week, you know what? That's pretty normal. It's pretty normal yet at that point. So you kind of have to just give it your all here for a bit. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of the basics, I guess, of how the breastfeeding process works. Biologically, what's happening there. I'm going to switch over to the next slide and just share with you some of the hormones that are happening in here. Okay. So the control of lactation. One second here. Oops, that's not right. Sorry. Okay, control of lactation. So it's a suckling initiation from your baby that starts this whole hormonal kind of flood into your body. So it's the baby actually at the breast, latched on, sucking successfully, that causes this huge sensory input that hits your hypothalamus. It causes your anterior pituitary gland and your anterior pituitary gland and your posterior pituitary gland to release the hormones that you need for lactation, your prolactin, your oxytocin. One of them, prolactin, is for the milk production, and oxytocin is for the milk release. So the milk release is actually that letdown that you feel. So high levels of oxytocin are needed for your letdown. High levels of prolactin are needed for you to make the milk. Think of these hormones in your body like you would think of like a prescription medication. You need these hormones in your body to make this all work. They have a half-life, though. Oxytocin and prolactin do not just stay there permanently. They need to be bumped. You need to, like, if you had a little button, bumping your medication through an IV, you would need to bump your oxytocin roughly every 2.5 to 3 hours to keep a steady supply of it in your system, and prolactin as well. What happens if you don't put your baby to breast frequently enough, every 2.5 to 3 hours, you're not getting the bump of these hormones that you need. And so your milk production starts to go down. So frequency is absolutely the best friend of breastfeeding, especially in the early days. Feed your baby frequently. Don't go more than 2.5 to 3 hours in that first week or so. Keep these hormonal levels as high as you can in your body, and your body will know what to do. Sometimes it's hard for us to trust that, especially if we think, well, my mom couldn't breastfeed, or my sister couldn't breastfeed, or I have small breasts, or whatever we're telling ourselves about why it won't work. It's hard to trust this process. But your body does know what to do. Believe it or not, you conceived a baby, and then you grew a baby without having to tell your body what to do. It just did it. It knew what to do. It still knows what to do, but at this point, you have to give it the signals reminding it that, yes, we still need to do this. If you don't bring your baby to breast frequently enough, there's another hormonal pathway that begins, and it's an inhibitor pathway, which begins to shut down your milk supply. So just don't even go there. Put your baby to breast as much as you can, and you will not hopefully experience the common problems of lactation. But this next slide, for those of you that have ever had problems with breastfeeding, you probably know this face all too well. Sometimes things just don't go right. Sometimes breastfeeding just doesn't go as easily as we hope it would go. In the instance of this picture that I have up right now, this baby has a legitimate tongue tie. Like I said earlier on, breastfeeding takes two people. It takes you as mom, and it takes your baby working together for this to work. If something's not right with one of you, even if the anatomy of your breast or if the anatomy of the baby's mouth, if something doesn't fit together right, breastfeeding is going to be very difficult. Now, so there can be several problems. I'm just going to go over a few of them. Usually we'll know that there's a problem going on when baby's not gaining their weight back. We want to see the baby back to birth weight by at least 2 weeks. I prefer to see them back to their birth weight by about 10 days. Your baby loses weight. After they are delivered, their birth weight is going to drop, usually around 7% or so, maybe even as much as 10%. But by day 10 or 2 weeks out, we want to see them back at their birth weight. If they're not there, we look for some of these problems, and there's usually one or more of them there. Like I said, mom could have nipple issues. She could have inverted nipples. She could have insufficient glandular tissue. She could have a previous breast surgery, something that's causing a problem, hormonal imbalances, something's not right from the mom's side. But from the baby side, there could also be things wrong too. I mean, if they're born prematurely, if they're weak, if they're little, if their mouth is just not shaped right, or if they just haven't figured it out yet, those can all be reasons that you should definitely look for help. So on this next slide, I put up just, this is the image of the proper latch, how to get a baby to properly latch on. And you see this in all the brochures and the textbooks of like how to get your baby to properly latch. But quite honestly, most moms are not able to tell if their baby is properly latched. Chances are good at some point that you are going to just need some help. Unless you have perfect nipples and your baby has a perfect mouth and tongue, it's probably not going to go perfectly well. So when the time comes, definitely reach out for help. Local Guiding Star centers, I'm going to say if you're anywhere near one of our centers, that should be your number one first place to go. All of our centers are required to have lactation consultants and lactation counselors on staff and available. So go to a Guiding Star center, see somebody in person. Wherever you gave birth at, they should also have lactation support. If you're at a baby-friendly hospital, they will absolutely have a lactation consultant there to help you. If you gave birth someplace that doesn't seem to really have a lot of support for breastfeeding, call up Lactation League. Lactation League has mother-to-mother peer support groups all over the country, all over the world, really. They've been around since the 50s, and these mamas know a thing about nursing, too. So you'll get somebody will help you. A great website, if you're just like not sure what you're seeing, like what is going on here, is kellymom.com. I really like Kelly Mom. It's a fellow IBCLC, and she just has really great peer-reviewed stuff. You're going to see a lot of stuff on the internet about breastfeeding. Very little of it is peer-reviewed. Very little of it is evidence-based. Avoid the mommy blog forums. Avoid the mothering forums. Find the resources that actually know what the research is and what you're actually looking at. So kellymom.com is a great place to start. And then you probably just need to meet with an IBCLC. So if you want to look for a local one, you can go to the ILCA website at ilca.org. You'll find a listing of registered, certified IBCLCs near you. Rates vary all over the country. Most of us work either in a hospital setting, a birth center, or private practice. I've moved now from the hospital into a private practice, and so I actually do a lot of home visits, which a lot of moms really love that. So check your area. You might have an IBCLC who's willing to come right out to your house. You don't even have to get out of your pajamas. Just stay where you're at. And as a lactation consultant, I really love seeing a mom at home with her baby because honestly, I had an instance one time where I had a mom who was working with her over the phone. Sounded like she was doing everything right, but she just was hurting. There was so much pain. Baby was gasping for air there was just a lot of clicking, like everything just sounded wrong. And so I finally made an appointment and I came out to her house and I saw that the chair that she was feeding this baby in was a stiff wooden antique heirloom rocking chair that had been handed down through her family. And this thing was the most uncomfortable chair I have ever seen. She could not hold the baby in such a way that she was able to relax. She was kind of leaning over the baby, kind of suffocating the baby, quite honestly. The baby was gasping for air because it had a breast covering its nose, its mouth, its everything. So just getting into her space, seeing her home, that made all the difference in that instance. So don't be afraid to welcome somebody into your home. Don't be nervous about it. We're birth professionals. We see a lot. So yeah, definitely ask for help when the time comes. So our centers, like I said, if you have a Guiding Star center near you, I highly recommend that that's where you start. We will respect whatever your breastfeeding goals are. Any lactation professional is going to work with you to meet your goals. Maybe your goal is only to do that first 3 days. Maybe your goal is only to do 6 weeks before you have to go back to work. Maybe your goal meets the U.S. national recommendation of 12 months. Maybe your goal meets the World Health Organization recommendation of 24 months. Whatever your goal is, we want to help you reach it because that's what really matters, is that you understand your own ability and that breastfeeding fits in with your life. It is a very healthy, good decision for you to make. We want to support you in doing that, but we will respect whatever it is that you've decided to do. It is a core service at our Guiding Star centers, so call them up and make sure you find somebody that can help you. So if you need help seeing where our centers are at, you can go to our website at guidingstarproject.com. theguidingstarproject.com. You can see the locations of all of our centers and find somebody there. But with that, I just want to open it up for questions. I kind of threw a lot of information at you there. If anybody has questions about breastfeeding, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you, Leah. That was great. We do have some questions. The first was sent in, and it says, my 6-month-old has been nursing every 2 hours since he was 4 weeks old. Is this likely to continue as I continue to introduce solids? I'd like to continue breastfeeding, but I'm exhausted.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's not normal at this point. Okay, so when I said, you need to keep the baby to breast frequently at the beginning, that's more to get your supply established. And once your supply is really good and established, it starts to kind of space out. So at 6 months out, most babies at 6 months are able to go periods of at least 4 hours, especially overnight. During the day, it might be a little close together and it might be clustered a little bit. But they are capable of going longer periods of time as long as they're getting a good feeding prior to that space and time. So assuming that you have a good milk supply, I guess there's a lot of little details here that are kind of missing in your question. You'd need someone to talk through all these little details, Assuming that you're transferring an adequate amount of milk, chances are good that baby is using breastfeeding more as a comfort mechanism if it's every 2 hours. In the very early days of breastfeeding, we say 8 to 12 times a day for a newborn. You're going to breastfeed 8 to 12 times a day. For a 6-month-old, we're probably spacing out closer, 6 to 8 times a day would be a more normal average. Especially as food is introduced, I would expect that space to get a lot longer. Hang in there, Mama. I'm sure you have a great supply because every 2 hours would absolutely keep your hormone levels pretty high. But hang in there because there is a light at the end of this. You should be getting a solid 4 hours at a time of sleep very, very soon. So, what was the rest of that question? I can't even remember.
No, that was it. You answered it just fine. There's another one that says, what are some of the reasons that might delay my milk coming in after giving birth?
Sure. Yeah. One of them I mentioned, kind of a common culprit that we look for right away is we look for that placental. If there's retained placental pieces, if milk is not coming in, we always check to make sure that the placenta was fully evacuated from there. If there is a lot of bleeding still a couple days out, if something just doesn't seem quite right, we may have a mom go back in just basically to have a uterine, scrape done to make sure the placenta's all out. Because like I said, that progesterone will absolutely inhibit your prolactin from having effect. So that can be one reason. Another reason is actually cesarean delivery or other, and not even just a cesarean, but a very long or traumatic delivery can sometimes delay milk from coming in. It can cause a lot of just extra pressure on the mom's body, I guess, to heal. It has a lot of other things going on when you have extra wounds and incisions and things that your body is working to heal. That milk supply can be just a little bit delayed. Probably one of the biggest things, though, honestly, is just not having a baby that sucks. If the baby does not latch on and suck good and effectively right from the very beginning, it doesn't really get things moving. So sometimes when we see a baby that is just not latching well, or if they're premature or if they're weak, we'll pull out the pump. So I do recommend all my moms that I work with, when they're still pregnant, I say, make sure you have your pump. Bring your pump to the hospital. Make sure that if you don't have a pump, that your hospital has a really good pump. Because oftentimes that baby, they'll come out, they'll latch on really great, in that first hour, and you get that really awesome, first kind of latch session, and you're like, oh, this is going to go perfectly, no problem. But then they go to sleep, and they sleep for 5 hours, and you can't get them to wake up. And so that's a little long. You need to start right from the point where they're born. we need to start really stimulating the breast. This includes the suction, if it's the baby or if it's a pump, but it also includes some manual hand expression and some compression on your breast. You have to get things moving. The more milk that you get out, the more milk that will come in. You will make more milk. You can optimize your supply in those first 3 days as you're switching from that lactogenesis 1 to lactogenesis 2 phase. I mean, it's a really amazing opportunity there to really awaken, all of those cells in your breast and maximize their capacity for milk production. There's a lot of really great videos on how to do that. One of my favorites, actually, and I'm just throwing out resources here now because I'm thinking about it, the Stanford School of Medicine, the website for the Stanford School of Medicine. If you go there, stanfordschoolofmedicine.com or .edu, whatever it is, just Google it, and then look for breastfeeding. And they've got several videos on their site. And one of my favorites is called Hands-on Pumping. And this just shows it's directly aimed at moms of preemies, babies that are just way too small, micro preemies, that they cannot effectively suck. A lot of moms with preemies have a hard time getting a full milk supply in, and so this video is focused on using a pump and using your hands to get the milk moving and to really get it to come in effectively and a full supply established. So Stanford School of Medicine, Hands-on Pumping. I recommend that video if your milk is not coming in by day 3. Absolutely try that. Day 4 for sure. But you should see it by the end of day 3, typically. And then subsequent births, it'll be a little bit earlier each time.
Great, thanks for that. The kind of a related question is there a certain pump you recommend?
Well, I'm not allowed to product endorse as a lactation consultant, but I will say that there's a few features that you should look for on pumps. I usually recommend that you look for a pump that is a closed system pump, meaning that the motor is basically sealed. Most pumps that moms buy or get from their insurance company are an open system, meaning that the motor is open to particles. You can get little bits of milk can get in there. When you crack open one of these pumps after using it for a year or two, you'll often find mold. You'll find, little residue that can be in the pump. That's why most pumps are not recommended for multiple users. You should not use a pump that your sister gave you or her friend gave her or your cousin never used or used it 5 times because chances are really good that there's particles of someone else's milk hanging out in the motor of that pump. Now, it's probably not terribly dangerous, but it's not recommended that you use an open system pump for more than one user. So there are a few brands that have a closed system that are meant just for moms to be using at home. All hospital-grade pumps are closed systems, so they can be used between multiple moms on a floor. You can move the pump from room to room, and they can all use it just fine because it's a sealed pump. There are a couple companies. The one that is probably the most famous for having a closed system pump for sale for moms at home is called Hygieia. And so if you think hygiene, it's just Hygieia. That has a closed system pump. Medela does have some versions of closed system. Avent has one. So there's several. There's several that have started to make that. So that's just something to be aware of. That I would recommend that. And then I would also just recommend that you have somebody with a vacuum pressure tester. Basically, I think that's the best way to call it, a pressure tester, to just check and make sure that the suction on your pump is adequate, especially if you have a used pump. Most of these pumps are only meant to have about 400 hours of total use. That you could easily go over that within a year, depending on how much you are using your pump. And so the seals, the things start to break down, the motor gets weaker, and the pressure of your pump can decrease. So make sure somebody checks to make sure that the pressure of your pump, I usually look to make sure that pumps are able to reach a pressure of about 200 pounds, 200 pounds of pressure in the first, like 3 to 4 seconds of turning the pump on. I want to see that it can get up to a nice high amount of pressure, and then I dial it back, because it's probably not very comfortable to pump at 200 pounds of pressure, but you want to make sure that it is capable of at least reaching that. Your pump can absolutely sabotage you. If you have a poor pump and you're depending on that pump to get your supply established, make sure that it works. Make sure it's a good pump. Don't waste your time on something that's used or cheap, because you're going to have results like that to match that. And a hand pump. Every mom should have a hand pump.
Great. We have one question that just came in. How often, if ever, have you encountered a mom who truly does not produce enough milk for baby? Tips for moms who say this is the case.
It does happen. It does happen, and that's the reason I have a job. I probably have a job because there's just a lot of women that have not seen breastfeeding and they need someone to just tell them the basics. But there really are those cases where I work with a mom for many weeks and many months, and the supply is never able to fully support her baby. So there's something called insufficient glandular tissue, IGT, where a girl, in her puberty and as she's growing, that she just does not produce enough glandular tissue, meaning that she doesn't even have enough milk ducts, it's not there. The tissue is just not there to make enough milk. Even when she maximizes what she has, it's just not enough for her baby. And so when that happens, it's a really difficult situation. And women that struggle with IGT, if you ever get a chance to go onto some of their support forums and just really read their stories, you should actually just go on and be aware, because you will hear people say things like, well, you're just not trying hard enough, or you're just not putting the baby to breast enough. And that's the case for most women. But for women that are genuinely putting their baby to breast every hour, they're pumping, they're doing fenugreek, they're doing moringa, they're doing, Reglan, they're taking every medication in the book, they're doing everything right, and their body just isn't capable of producing that milk supply. It's a tremendously hurtful experience for them to be told in some way that they're not enough, not good enough. They're not able to make enough for their baby. And so when I work with these moms, the message that I just have to them repeatedly is every effort that you're making is better than nothing. Absolutely better than not doing it at all. If you're willing to keep doing this, if you're willing to put your baby to breast, there are absolutely benefits for both of you, and we go through all the benefits, we go through everything. Oftentimes these moms are able to produce, maybe a half a supply or a quarter of a supply. But the fact that they're able to put their baby to breast, and hopefully as the experience goes along, hopefully it's not a negative screaming baby at the breast because they're freaking out. Once they can figure out their groove, like maybe it means they give the baby 2 ounces of formula, prior to bringing the baby to breast, and then they're able to actually have that last ounce come from their breast, and the baby is calm and cooing and happy, and they're able to have that bonding experience. That's very valuable. That's definitely not something that I would ever say is not worth it. Sure, maybe you only gave them a third of what they needed nutritionally, but you just gave them 100% of what they needed, emotionally with that moment. So before you speak ever to a woman who's struggling, just guard yourself and make sure that you truly understand her situation. Always advise her to work with a lactation professional. A good lactation consultant is going to know the signs of IGT. We're going to know some of the signs of other conditions that would make it very difficult for a full breastfeeding experience. And we'll help her. We'll help her know that you know what, it's still worth doing, and you're still an amazing mother.
Great, Leah, thanks. I think we've got enough time for at least one more, maybe a couple. We have one. I know that there's some pain associated with starting to breastfeed, but when do I know that there's something wrong, that there's too much pain?
Oh, that's a really good question. Too much pain. Okay, so it probably is going to hurt a little bit. when you first start breastfeeding. And by a little bit, I mean it's a nip. It's like a, ooh, and maybe for the first 5 to 10 seconds of the baby being latched on, it's a little sore in the first week or 2 weeks. If you are experiencing any sort of bleeding, cracking, like deep fissures forming in your nipple, something's wrong. Something's not right. That's a point where you should absolutely seek out lactation professional help, care. That means that there's something very wrong with this latch. Obviously, the pain is going to be intolerable. If you are feeling like you need to, like, your toes are like curling up and it feels like there's razor blades and you can't really breathe and your back is tightening as you're trying to latch your baby, that's not a normal level of pain. That's too much. Most lactation consultants will say that any pain means something's wrong. I recognize that for especially a new mom or a woman with very sensitive nipples, that sometimes a little bit of pain in that first week might be just an adjustment period. If it's like adjustment pain, like I'm just kind of getting used to this, it's probably normal. If it's severe, stabbing, sharp, it's not right. Get some help. Does that answer that?
Yeah, thank you. Good, and that leaves us with a little bit more time. Another pumping question. I am going back to work after having my baby, and I'm wondering if you have any tips for pumping, because I would like to continue giving breast milk to my baby.
Yeah, first of all, working moms that pump, wow, like I commend you. I absolutely commend you. I had the complete, absolute privilege. I mean, like, I was so privileged in that I didn't have to go back to work for my first, 4 kids. My first 4 kids, I was able to just be home with them full time. After baby number 5, I went back to work part-time. And I was working as a lactation consultant in a hospital with a lactation room with adequate lactation time to go pump. And wow, that was hard. It was the first time I ever really fully understood how difficult it can be for working moms to keep up their milk supply. Now, when you're with your baby all the time, you have the benefit of just on-demand feeding. Your baby's hungry, you feed him. Your breast is starting to feel full, you put your baby to it, you feed it. It's a very easy symbiotic relationship of supply and demand. Now, when you're away from your baby for several hours a day, it's very easy for that relationship to get off one way or the other. Before going back to work, definitely make your employer aware of your needs for breastfeeding. Remind them gently of their some of the legal requirements in your state and federal requirements, if they're anything that applies to your situation, for them to provide a space for you to nurse or to pump rather, and then also break time for pumping. Just make sure that the logistical things are in place. You know where you're going to pump, you know when you're going to pump. That's really important. Then, if you know that you're going to be going back to work, at around 4 to 6 weeks, it's a good idea to give your baby a bottle at some point. If you wait too long, I've seen this a few times now, if you wait too long to introduce a bottle to a breastfed baby, sometimes they just flat out refuse to take it. They struggle. They don't know how to latch onto it. They get frustrated with it because it doesn't have like that milk ejection. It doesn't have that letdown that kind of sprays. They have to suck on it, and they struggle to adjust to it. So around 4 to 6 weeks, make sure that you do introduce a bottle to the baby. And then about 2 weeks before you're expected to go back to work, start slowly getting into the routine of what you're going to be doing. Start pumping to make sure that you're able to have a good letdown, that you're able to actually effectively pump. You might need to consider recording your baby, having a video of them on your phone that you can watch. A lot of moms won't let down unless they have some sort of emotional connection to their baby. So when they're alone in a room at work without their baby near them, they struggle. So figure out how to most effectively pump. Learn how much milk that you are going to be pumping roughly during a pumping session. Get an idea of how much milk you'll be able to produce while you're at work. And then also make sure that you're talking with your child care provider. that they know about your goals to continue breastfeeding, that they know to expect that they will be feeding your baby milk while at childcare, while you're gone, and that they also understand what's a normal amount of milk to feed the baby while you're gone. It's very common for daycare providers to overfeed a breastfed baby. They're not used to a baby that nurses frequently. They're used to a baby, typically a formula-fed baby will get a larger amount of milk less frequently. And that's the exact opposite with a breastfed baby. They get smaller amounts of milk more frequently. So you need to make sure that your daycare provider is a little bit prepared for this as well. And so we want to get your pumping supply at work matched up with the amount of milk that the baby is getting when it's at childcare. The other kind of important piece that I recommend to moms that are going back to work full time is that you've got a stash in the freezer before going back to work. I always recommend that mom have a 3-day supply of milk, which is roughly 75 ounces. A baby is going to be getting about 25 ounces a day is pretty normal for, about a 3-month-old baby. They take about 25 to 35 ounces a day from about 3 to 6 months. That's a pretty normal amount. So make sure you've got at least a full 3-day supply in the freezer just in case something happens, like there's an emergency situation, whatever. And then if you're going back to work, add another day onto that. So try to have about 100 ounces of milk kind of just stored away in the freezer. That takes a lot of the pressure off those first few days of back at work when you're trying to figure this all out. It can be a bit of a learning curve to figure out how you transport the milk back and forth. Does it go straight into the freezer? Do you keep it for the next day to the daycare provider? A lot of these things you just kind of have to figure out and learn for what works with your day, your schedule, your provider. One of the best websites I've ever found specifically to support moms that are working is called Work and Pump. So it's workandpump.com. And that website gives very good practical advice on everything from asserting your rights to breastfeed to helping your employer designate good times for you to go off and pump, and then also just kind of how to keep the relationship with your coworkers healthy and not super awkward, because that can be awkward when you are slipping away to pump and they may not respect or understand what you're doing. So that site can be a really good kind of support network for moms that are going back to work. So workandpump.com is what I would recommend for moms there. But yeah, I have to commend you if that is you, if you are a full-time working mom or a part-time working mom, or away from your baby at all, and you have to pump and save the milk. You're a boss. Like, that's amazing. You're doing great work.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. That's really helpful. We have just a couple minutes left, but we just got this question in that I'd like you to get to. Sorry, my little one's in the background. My baby is 7 weeks old today and has been doing really well feeding, but is a sleepy eater. She has been gaining good weight and seems to be satisfied, but I'm worried about my supply going down constantly. Could my supply be affected because of this? And if so, what would be some good ways to help increase your supply?
Sure. No, that's a really good question. So 7 weeks old is kind of that really great magical point where hopefully your milk is fully established, that you've got a really good supply. And so a sleepy eater, I guess that's really normal. I mean, if this is something that you're doing frequently, the baby will often kind of fall asleep at breast. If you're feeling like the baby is not emptying the breast, that's a problem. If the baby is fully emptying the breast and then falling asleep there, you said she's been gaining good weight and seems to be satisfied. That's, probably a good indication that everything's fine. However, if your breast is still full or not full even, I guess, but if it feels firm still, feed the baby at one breast. Make sure that breast is fully emptied. When I say fully emptied, I mean it's like deflated, like it feels empty. And then if your baby is still, hungry or interested, then switch over to the second breast. So if you're fully emptying your breast at each feeding, your supply will stay great. So ways to increase your supply, frequency. As frequently as possible that you can empty your breast. Like, remember what I was talking about earlier with the oxytocin being kind of like a drug, like a hormonal drug there? when you bring your baby to breast and you have a letdown, that's an oxytocin bump in your system. So the greater the number of letdowns that you have in a day, the greater your supply is going to be. Keep your oxytocin levels high, have frequent letdowns, get through the second letdown. You always will have a first letdown, when you bring your baby to breast, probably in that first, minute, 90 seconds. You're going to have a second letdown about 7 to 10 minutes in. Keep your baby there, get through that second letdown, maximize oxytocin, and you will have a good supply. So there's that.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with? Any final words?
I guess just, no matter how breastfeeding is going for you, know that you were made for this, that your body is amazing, that with good help and support, surround yourself with really positive people, surround yourself with people that really know about this, that have succeeded, that have worked their way through problems, have a good support network around you, and never be afraid to reach out for help. Find the people who know this, and they'll be able to walk alongside you through this process. So you're not alone. You're never alone in this. And we all want to see you succeed, and we want to see your fat, chubby little baby succeed. So yeah, it's just been an honor. Thanks so much for listening in and for your questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight, and look for information coming up again on our next webinar, which will be coming up next month. Thanks. Have a great night, everybody.